Hey everybody, this is Jordan here, and this is Robert Pugh with Farm Bureau Insurance, and today we're going to talk about insurance, what's covered, what's not, what you need to know. We're a little frozen here. Anyways, Robert, how are you doing today?
Wonderful, thank you for having me, I appreciate it. Hopefully we can teach a little bit today and have some good conversation.
Excellent, excellent. Well, Robert is actually a direct agent, not an insurance broker. So what is the difference between those two?
There's a large difference. As a direct writer, we would typically represent some of the larger firms, larger agencies, State Farm, Nationwide, Allstate are all direct writers, much like Farm Bureau. A broker represents many, many different companies.
Interesting. And are brokers more preferential to specific agencies?
They typically end up that way, believe it or not. They typically end up only writing insurance for a few companies. And so in that particular case, the allure of a broker may sound good up front, but it's not always the best deal. So you might want to continue to shop, even with the direct writer.
That's good to know. So we had a few questions in the comments section. And the first one is, what major appliances are covered under your homeowner's insurance?
Great question. I get that question almost every day, especially with the weather. So anything that's attached to the structure is going to be covered. So your built-in dishwasher is going to be covered. Your built-in oven is going to be covered. If a microwave happens to be built in, it's going to be covered as well. The major one that's not covered is a refrigerator because it's not attached. And so that's considered personal property, but it's still covered under your personal property.
Okay, so that's good to know. So even an HVAC system, that would be covered.
HVAC system, plumbing systems, electrical systems are all covered under the structure part. Anything that's not attached is covered underneath your personal property coverage.
Okay. So what has to happen in order for your appliances to be covered? What kind of event?
An event defined in insurance is typically sudden and accidental. The major ones we can think of off the top of our head are fire, lightning, wind, falling objects, theft is a big one nowadays. Any of those major sudden and accidental problems. General wear and tear is not covered under insurance. That's more of a warranty situation or some other form of insurance if you can find it.
Okay, that makes sense. So because the system is old, that doesn't necessarily mean that it would be covered just because it went out because of age.
That's correct.
Okay.
That is absolutely correct.
Okay, that's good to know, and it's good to have that cleared up. So we do live in a deciduous rainforest, if I could bring out the big words.
That's a big word.
We have a lot of trees and a lot of public property. So let's say a tree falls from public property onto private property, somebody's personal car or their home. How is that covered under insurance?
Great question. I get that question probably once a week now. Tree falling is considered an act of God. So if the wind pushed it over or there's too much rain and it saturated the ground and the tree falls over and hits your property, unfortunately it's going to be your responsibility. And the reason we do that is because the other person, the public in this case, can't be responsible for an act of God. So we just put it on the homeowner or their insurance for their car. There are certain circumstances which you can assign blame to the other party, but we don't have to get into that for the purposes of this.
Okay. So if you have more questions, please refer to Robert about that. So what about if my neighbor has a tree on his property and it falls onto my house? How is that covered?
It's going to be covered under your home insurance, even though it's on your neighbor's property, because he can't be responsible for an act of God.
Good to know. So we recently, unfortunately in the area have had a lot of flooding due to torrential rains. As far as flood insurance goes, do you feel like folks should take out flood insurance even if they're not in a flood zone?
Great question. I get asked a lot of questions. Me personally, my personal thought is I carry 4 insurances and 4 insurances only. Auto, home, life, and health. Those are the major problems we normally have issues with. When it comes to flood, that is up to the individual and their level of risk. If they feel that they need it, then they should take it out. If it makes them feel more comfortable and they want to spend the money, then they should absolutely buy it. personally, I don't take that risk. I'm just going to take the risk of a flood myself. But that's me. You are you. And if you feel like you want to buy it, then you should shop around and purchase it.
Okay. And if somebody does choose to add the flood insurance in, would an appraiser come out to appraise the house, or would all of that information be based on the cost of it, be based on the current insurance that you have?
Correct. So we base flood insurance on the cost to rebuild the structure and then the contents. The maximum, I believe, I don't do a lot of flood insurance, but the maximum you can cover a house for under the National Flood Insurance Plan is $200,000.
$200,000. Heard that. So another thing that's really important is umbrella insurance. So can you talk a little bit about that and when somebody might want to think about taking out an umbrella?
Great question. Again, that's going to be one of those policies where it's up to the individual and their level of risk. Most of the time, we talk about umbrellas when your net worth starts to get fairly high, because what an umbrella does is it extends coverage from your underlying insurance policies. So if you have a bad enough car accident and your car insurance is not enough to cover that accident, your umbrella steps in and picks up the difference. Same thing with the home. If you have a liability claim against you and the home insurance is not enough to cover, your umbrella would step in and cover that. Now, some people like them because they're relatively inexpensive, a couple of $100 a year for another $1 million personal liability.
That's pretty good.
But most of the time, it's not until your net worth gets to be pretty high that you want to consider it. However, again, insurance is all about your level of risk and your level of how comfortable you want to feel. And if you feel comfortable, you ought to talk to your agent about it.
Okay. So what other insurance products are available to add on to your homeowner's insurance?
Wow. That's so we call those endorsements in the business, and there are many. I printed a list because there is many endorsements that you can add. You can get increased limits on business property. So if you're a contractor and you've got your tools at the house, you can add other structures. Now we have a lot of people that are renting out garage apartments and those things. You can also endorse it for other structures away from the premises. You can endorse it for jewelry. You can endorse it for refrigerated property. And then again, we were talking about this earlier, you can have a sinkhole and collapse coverage if you want to. If you're worried about a sinkhole, you can endorse your policy for that. You can endorse it for earthquake coverage if you want to. You can endorse it for a fire department service charge. You can endorse it for a boat. Other structures that you're renting to other people for liability purposes. And the list goes on and on and on. We have daycare endorsements, assisted living endorsements. However, most of the time, a lot of these things will not apply to a typical regular homeowner that has a 9-to-5 job like most of us.
Okay. But it's good to know if you are considering turning a part of your home into an Airbnb, a short-term rental, that there are coverages for you. Now, does that change your coverage level? Like, do you need to notify your agent that you have turned your home into a short-term rental?
Yes. You can endorse your home for Airbnb now. However, there are certain limitations that you need to talk to your insurance company about. If you rent it too often, or in some cases, if you rent another structure that's not attached to the house, it may or may not be covered according to that company's guidelines. I can't speak about any other company because this is a fairly new endorsement, since what we're seeing now is a lot of people are buying things to rent short term. But typically with us, if you rent your house less than 180 days a year and it's only part of your home, maybe a basement or a room or just another section that's attached, it's going to be covered. Anything over 180 days, you're going to have to write a commercial type policy to be covered accurately.
Oh, that's very good. Very good to know. And on the other side of short-term rental is the long-term rental. Now, if you are turning, let's say you're moving out of your primary residence and you want to turn it into a rental property long-term, what kind of insurance would be needed for that?
Great question. You're going to want to change it into a rental type policy or what we call a dwelling policy. The major concern there is the liability. Hot water heater turns on too hot and burns somebody. The deck collapses and hurts your tenant, those kinds of things that you're worried about. The structure is not such a major problem. Most of the time it's the liability you'd be worried about. Getting sued, basically. When it comes to the fire insurance, A dwelling policy would cover that, but you would obviously not want to cover any of the contents if you're moving out completely and the person moving in is moving all their contents in. So, however, if it was an Airbnb, you would certainly want to keep contents coverage on the property because of all the furniture and furnishings you put in.
Absolutely. So as we're talking about renters, long-term renters, renters insurance, how important is that for a landlord to require their tenants to have?
Great question. I recommend it to everybody in this case. It's simple, it's cheap. Anybody that moves into your property, you're going to want to have them have renters insurance, to cover their belongings, which in my opinion is not the major risk. I would consider the major risk a liability issue. So if I'm over at your house and you're renting and I decide to sue you, if I get a good enough attorney, which most of them do this, they're going to turn around and sue you and the landlord. And so you want to be endorsed as the landlord on that renter's policy to give you a little extra layer of protection. And there's no extra charge for that. So I would make it a requirement. Most all apartments do this nowadays.
Yes, I think renters insurance is very, very important for that liability purpose. It will take care of you as a renter if the need arises. And lastly, what is the most important thing a homeowner should know about their policy?
Great question. That is really a hard question to answer because what's important to you is not always important to me. But if I had to put something onto that, I would say who to call and when to call them in an emergency. If it's an 800 number, maybe. Really and truthfully, I believe you should be able to call your agent directly, shoot them a text, or get a hold of them immediately. I think that's the most important because when there's a time of a crisis, you want to get a hold of somebody immediately and you need some help.
Exactly. And, I know that a lot of us homeowners out there, we're not sure who to call just in case something happened. Especially if you're going more on the broker side, do you call that broker or would you be calling, just the general insurance company and end up in the call automated system, which is not fun if the tree is on your house, for example. So, Robert, thank you for today and for answering all of my questions. If you guys need anything at all, Robert is your expert as far as insurance and everything goes. We'll put his information in the comment below, and my information will always be there. Again, I'm Jordan with High Vistas Realty. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope everybody has a great day.
Thanks, Jordan.